He was hauling rotted, junk beehives onto his father's flatbed, and every farmer in the valley thought the kid had lost his mind. Nobody knew that 17-year-old Caleb Voss was about to turn a shed full of trash into the most talked-about story this small town had ever seen. Stick around, because what happens next will change the way you look at things people throw away. And before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Millbrook County was a small valley 2 hours from the nearest highway, surrounded by dairy farms and orchards that had been passed down for generations. Everyone knew everyone's business here, whether they wanted to or not. The Voss family ran 40 acres of pasture and crops, nothing fancy, just hard work and long days. Caleb was the quiet kind of kid, not the one teachers bragged about, not the one anyone expected big things from. So when he started asking around about bees, people noticed. It started with one conversation at the feed store with an old man named Harlan Petrie, who used to keep bees decades ago before his hands gave out. Caleb didn't ask the questions a curious kid would ask. He asked why a hive dies overnight. He asked what it means when bees stop bringing home pollen. Harlan talked for almost an hour, shocked that anyone his age even cared. Then Caleb started collecting. Every abandoned hive box in the valley had a sad story attached to it. Colonies that collapsed overnight. Bees that vanished without a trace, leaving behind empty homes and untouched honey. Wood rot. Raccoon attacks. Every farmer said the same thing when Caleb asked to take their old boxes. Take them. They're worthless anyway. Nobody thought twice about handing over their junk. But Caleb wasn't collecting trash. He was collecting potential, and he wasn't ready to explain that to anyone yet. By spring, 40 rotting hive boxes sat stacked behind his family's shed like some strange monument nobody could explain. His mother asked him at dinner one night what exactly he thought he was doing. All he said was, "I'm still figuring it out." Then he kept eating. His best friend Dylan cornered him while fixing fence one afternoon. "You're not seriously starting a bee farm with garbage boxes, are you?" Caleb just shrugged. "Working on it." That answer wasn't good enough for anyone in town, but it was the only one he had. What nobody knew was that Caleb carried a battered notebook everywhere, filled with sketches, questions, and half-formed plans. And there was one man in the valley who might actually help him turn those plans into something real. His name was Walt Iverson, 74 years old, a retired beekeeper who once managed almost 200 colonies before his body forced him to stop. Most kids were scared of Walt. He didn't tolerate nonsense. Caleb showed up at his door one Saturday morning with a single question. Was it possible to bring a dead hive back to life using bees from a healthier colony? Walt studied him for a long moment. "Depends what killed it," he said. "Sit down." That was the beginning of something neither of them expected. Over the following weeks, Walt became part teacher, part skeptic, testing Caleb at every turn, refusing to make anything easy. He taught him to read a hive like a book. A tight, spiraled pattern of eggs meant a strong queen. A scattered, broken pattern meant trouble. "Bees don't fail," Walt told him one afternoon, holding up a frame from one of Caleb's rescued hives. "People fail bees." That line stuck with Caleb more than anything else. But knowledge alone didn't save him from mistakes. His first attempt to introduce a new queen went horribly wrong. He rushed it, and the existing bees killed her within a day. Walt didn't soften the blow. "You rushed it," he said flatly. "They don't care how excited you are." Caleb learned patience the hard way, something that didn't come naturally to a teenager desperate to prove himself. He rebuilt slowly. 3 sturdy salvaged hives became working colonies, filled with small starter bee colonies bought from 2 counties over. It was dirty, exhausting work, patching rotted wood, scorching old boxes clean, replacing frames destroyed by pests. But by early summer, those 3 hives were alive and humming, literally. Caleb learned the sound of a healthy colony, a steady hum that changed pitch the moment something was wrong. He learned to spot the warning signs before they cost him everything. Not everyone believed in what he was doing. Some of the older farmers laughed behind his back, calling it a waste of time. His own uncle asked his father if the boy needed help, but a few people started paying attention in quiet ways. Harlan Petrie began stopping by just to watch. Even Dylan started showing up on weekends, getting stung often enough that he stopped complaining about it. Then came the test that changed everything. In the worst heat wave the valley had seen in 10 years, 2 established beekeepers nearby lost entire colonies to the heat. Caleb didn't lose a single hive. He'd built his boxes with extra airflow and painted them to reflect the sun. Tricks Walt had spent decades learning the hard way. Suddenly, people weren't laughing anymore. By late July, Caleb had grown to a dozen thriving colonies. But summer wasn't finished with him yet. In early August, one of his proudest hives, one of the very first he'd saved, started acting sick. Fewer bees were flying out. The ones that returned came back empty. When he pulled a frame, his stomach dropped. The pattern was broken and irregular. Something was very wrong. He rushed straight to Walt's house with the frame wrapped in a damp towel. Walt studied it under a lamp in silence. "Could be a failing queen," he said. "Could be foul brood. And if it's that, we don't save this hive. We burn it before it spreads to every box you own." Caleb's throat tightened. Everything he'd built could vanish in an afternoon. They tested immediately. The result came back clean. It wasn't disease. It was simply a queen reaching the end of her life. Walt snapped his test kit shut and said something Caleb never forgot. "This is the part nobody tells you about beekeeping. It's not really about the bees. It's about noticing trouble early enough to still fix it." Caleb requeened the hive carefully this time, exactly the way he'd been taught. 10 days later, the colony was thriving again like nothing had ever happened. By August, Caleb had 15 working colonies, all built from equipment everyone else had thrown away. He pulled his first honey harvest that month, spinning golden honey out of a borrowed extractor late into the night with Walt by his side. It wasn't a fortune, just a few hundred jars sold at the farmer's market with a handwritten label, but something bigger was already taking shape. Local orchard owners started asking him a question nobody expected. Could his bees pollinate their apple trees next spring? 2 orchards had struggled with weak fruit for years, and Caleb had quietly suspected why all along. Now he had proof and a plan. He wasn't just keeping bees anymore. He was rebuilding something the entire valley had lost without even realizing it. Winter brought a different kind of test, one with no drama, just cold and silence. Walt warned him that more hives die in winter from starvation than from the cold itself. So in November, Caleb checked every single colony by hand, weighing honey stores, wrapping insulation, sealing out mice, cutting small vents to release moisture before it could freeze the cluster inside. Then all he could do was wait, brushing snow off the boxes every few weeks, pressing his ear close, listening for that faint, steady hum that meant life was still holding on inside. When the first warm days of March finally came, he pried open the first box with his heart in his throat. The colony was alive. Smaller, worn down by the season, but alive, with a fresh ring of eggs already glowing in the center of the frame. Every single hive survived that winter. Even Walt admitted it was one of the best survival rates he'd ever witnessed from a first-year beekeeper. That spring, Caleb moved 8 of his strongest hives to the DeWeiler orchard, the same farm that had given up on bees years earlier after losing everything. Old man Deweiler watched the delivery in silence, arms crossed, saying nothing. 6 weeks later, he stood beneath branches so heavy with apples that some had to be propped up. He hadn't seen a harvest like it in over a decade. He drove straight to the Voss farm that same afternoon and found Caleb repairing a hive stand. "Didn't think much of what you were doing with those old boxes," he admitted. "I know," Caleb said. "Wasn't sure you did either." Deweiler looked out over the shed, once destined for the burn pile, now full of life, and said the closest thing to an apology the old man had ever given. "Well, glad somebody in this valley was paying attention." By the following year, Caleb was running nearly 30 colonies with standing pollination deals with 3 local orchards. Harlan Petrie visited most weekends just to talk bees, saying it gave him more purpose than he'd felt in years. Walt kept correcting his technique, though the corrections grew smaller with every season. And slowly, the whole valley changed the way it looked at things it once threw away. A neglected hive wasn't trash anymore. It was potential. And the quiet kid nobody worried about became someone people quietly admired. What Caleb built wasn't flashy. It wasn't an overnight fortune. It was patient, steady, and real. Proof that most of what gets written off as worthless just needs someone willing to look closer and ask why instead of assuming they already know the answer. He still carries that same notebook today, only now it holds 3 years of notes instead of a handful of sketches. And every spring, when his bees fill the orchard air with that familiar hum, a few more people remember exactly why they doubted him, and exactly why they never will again. If you've ever built something out of what everyone else gave up on, tell us your story in the comments. And if this one kept you hooked till the very end, subscribe, because Aftermath Tales has plenty more stories just like it coming your way.